When it comes to the update 1193, the editorial this time was written by me with the title, Don't Despair of Life. And just to make one comment about it, in this world in which we are living, it's, pretty dark sometimes, pretty distressful, and we can easily fall into the ditch of becoming depressed, thinking, oh, why should I go on with life? It's all going to be over pretty soon. Now, this editorial tries to encourage all of you not to think that way, but to live a life with the understanding that you might live a life for many, many years to come. Now, always be ready spiritually, but don't ever make the mistake of saying, oh, well, why should I go on? Why should I get good grades in school? Why should I go to college? Why should I go to university? Because after all, it's not going to be worthwhile. That would be a totally wrong approach. Now, you want to go with your life. You want to do the best you can possibly do. And don't be satisfied thinking, oh, I can work for McDonald's for the rest of my life. No, you get your career. You get whatever you need to do to get forward in life. And there are good things in life too, in this world. And of course the editorial goes into some of that. Going to an amusement park together with your family or on a sightseeing trip or whatever it may be. Don't always think that, oh, that is not worthwhile doing. It would be a terrible mistake to think that way. The current events, I want to just give you the summary. We begin with articles about plans for the Gaza's future, as presented by Jared Kushner and envisioned by his father-in-law, Donald Trump, all of which are doomed to fail. I'd like to emphasize that again. All are doomed to fail. In this context, we also report on a military alliance, you might not even have heard about it, between Israel, Greece, and Cyprus against Turkey. We also speak on ongoing threats by Trump against Canada and Panama. And of course, when it comes to Canada, we have a standing watch out, going into that some more, with the title, Will the US Invade Canada? We also talk about America's refusal of military support for Europe. We'll talk about that in a moment. A military treaty between Germany and Italy, which cannot be overemphasized how important that is in the light of biblical prophecy. And then we also address a concept that in all of this, Britain may be left behind again in fulfillment of biblical prophecy, as you undoubtedly know. So I'm not going to talk about all the articles we have in the update regarding Canada, because this is covered in our standing watch, and I'd like to just give you a summary of that one. It says, will the US invade Canada? Impossible. Don't be too sure. This program analyzes the frightening facts and the escalating war of words between President Trump and Prime Minister Mark Carney, Trump's ongoing threats, Canada's fears, obvious parallels between Canada, Venezuela, and Greenland, and I could also add now Panama, and a striking historical example from the 1930s. And we have also the same program in German, Wird Amerika and Canada einmarschieren. Let's go back to the update, the current events. We published an article covering an interview by the former European Parliament President Martin Schulz. And what he has been saying recently is quite interesting. And by the way, he's not ruling out running for chancellor in Germany in the future. But he said some countries should move ahead. If not all EU member states agree. And he sees a trio of Germany, France, and Italy as an important driving force for Europe. He said in particular that at least 9 countries, could have said 10, at least 9 countries can join together without the others being able to prevent it. Now, we don't have this in this update, we're going to have it in the next one, but the idea of Europe coming together by using core nations or Europe with two speeds is becoming more and more popular. And also the idea that Europe should have an all-powerful leader. The European People's Party boss Manfred Weber said on Wednesday that the EU leadership structure should be reformed. Right now we have different authorities. He said that's all no good, and that should all be combined in one man. And again, he's talking about those countries who are willing to advance that route. Now, as you know, from a biblical standpoint, we know that there are going to be 10 core nations or groups of nations. And they're going to give their power and their authority to a very powerful, charismatic leader called the Beast. We know that. It's interesting that now more and more people, specifically in Germany, in Europe, are talking about it. Obviously not knowing anything about the Bible, but talking about these very concepts, as if they are kind of inspired to say those words. We also have an article in here talking about the fact that America has been saying now, okay, we're not going to really help Europe anymore that much as we used to help them. And the NPR is saying it kept off a week of animosity between President Donald Trump's administration and traditional allies like Europe. It specifically points to access to the Panama Canal and Greenland. Trump previously suggested that the US should potentially consider retaking control of the Panama Canal. Now that may be also something which we might be experiencing in the future. Not that it's going to work out, but the attempts could very well be made. Since we're talking about Europe of two speeds, the chief of Spain's diplomacy, José Manuel Albares, I hope I pronounced that correctly, called on Europe to take full control of its own security, arguing that the continent must move towards a European army. That's what he said. We need firstly a coalition of the willing. Always these words, coalition of the willing. In other words, a certain amount of countries, 9, 10. Recently a prominent German politician talked about 10 European countries coming together. And of course then he says, and ultimately it should end up in a European army. If you cannot see that this is all in line with biblical prophecy, then I want to give you another example. Because Daily Express talked about the fact that the European NATO, that's an article they published, the European NATO, along with Canada, has no time to waste in preparing for a new world order in which they no longer depend for security on the United States. This is a wake-up call for the British government. Britain is being left behind, and nothing will change under the current government. What is at stake is nothing less than a national survival question, but the Brits don't see it that way. There are scriptures in the Bible which say exactly that. Britain is like a cake which has not been turned. Doesn't understand any longer that they are not the empire they used to be. Of course, then we are talking at length about the killing in Minnesota. The fact that because of the tremendous uproar this has caused, first the idea was like Trump is replacing Kristi Noem with Tom Homan, and the reaction to me was just stunning. But people were saying, oh, well, now this is going to be great because now we are going to have more peace and quiet in Minnesota and Minneapolis. Tom Homan? Are you kidding me? I couldn't believe when I heard that. We have an article by the Daily Mail talking about the power struggle, which has been going on between DHS and ICE, between Homan and Noem. An absolute power struggle. Everybody wanted to be in charge. Reminded me, as we say in our comments, between the power struggle, or of the power struggle between the SA Sturmabteilung and the SS Schutzstaffel in Hitler's Germany. And ultimately the SS won, and the SA was gone. I'm just talking about the power struggle here. These power struggles will always end with something. And so, of course, originally the idea was like, Norm is going to be replaced. Norm is going to be replaced. Well, I'm telling you in a moment what happened. Because also there was another guy, and I have to admit I didn't know too much about him, Gregory Bovino, but apparently he was really a character. Now he has been removed, it says, from his role as Border Patrol's commander at large, and will return to his former job in El Centro, California. And well, he has been compared with all kinds of interesting persons. But Trump came right back, said, oh, no, they're doing a great job, great American, and all of that. And so it hasn't calmed down anything. If you have seen the news and you see the tremendous amount of demonstrations going on, not just in Minneapolis, but also around the country, you can see that it has not really calmed down at all. The Daily Mail wrote on January 28 that this is now Trump's watershed moment. And you might want to read this article if you haven't already. They say, well, as Joe Biden never recovered from his Afghanistan debacle, and Jimmy Carter never recovered from his Iran hostage debacle, and George Bush's popularity never rebounded after Hurricane Katrina's debacle. I use the word debacle for a reason. They say that now has reached Trump, and he might not recover, and he might lose the midterm elections big time, which many feel he will. Now, we have an article by NPR about the mother of all deals. This is talking about a treaty between India and the European Union. It says this will deepen the economic and strategic ties, and it will be very good for both power blocks. It will affect as many as 2 billion people. So you see, Europe is looking for other allies than the United States. In Germany, most people in Germany feel that Trump has become even a threat for their security and their survival. That's how bad it has gotten. But I wanted to talk about the cooperation agreement between Germany and Italy. Deutsche Welle wrote on January 23 that Germany and Italy are deepening defense and economic cooperation, with the leaders of the two countries signing an agreement in Rome. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni agreed on closer cooperation in the production of drones, naval vessels, underwater systems, and air missile defense systems. And then it says the leaders also are looking to collaborate in the development of electronic warfare and aerial combat defense systems. And then we are quoting from the European Council of Foreign Relations, and they say this sends a signal that Italy and Germany intend to shape the European defense pillar together rather than merely contribute to it separately. So again, we're talking about Italy, we're talking about Germany, and also France is mentioned, at least at this point. Have to see what's going to happen when Macron is stepping down and who's going to take his position. Now, when I was reading that, I immediately thought of the Pact of Steel. Now, you might have heard about the Pact of Steel, this infamous Pact of Steel between Italy and Germany, which was signed in 1939, declaring cooperation concerning the military and the economy. Now, this Pact of Steel actually at the time was signed in Berlin. Now it's signed in Rome. Of course, you know, you have again a clear indication of the final revival of the Roman Empire. So that's going on, and I believe that is quite important to think in terms of what is happening now and how this is going to affect everybody and how history is repeating itself. Now, I like to go back to something which we are going to publish more in detail in the next update. And when I was reading that, I thought, well, this guy must have seen our Standing Watch program, Trump's Greenland Deal, Defeat or Distraction. If you haven't seen that one yet, it's maybe about 2 or 3 weeks old. If you have seen it and remember what we said in there, let me just read to you what The Guardian published on January 30. He says, "Don't be fooled. When it comes to Donald Trump, what might look like a full retreat is almost always a mere tactical withdrawal designed to buy time. This week, the US president won praise in some quarters for moving to, quote-unquote, de-escalate the war he has been waging on the people of Minneapolis. But remember, it's only a pause. The instant the pressure erases, normal services resume. For all the earlier talk, both Noam and Miller, Stephen Miller, as well as Bovino, remain in their jobs. There was even some talk that he might fire Stephen Miller, which he should have done a long time ago. But no, he's not doing that. In fact, he's praising them all. But then the article goes on to say that he, of course, have made threats, Trump that is, to seize Greenland, and then he kind of seemingly withdrew under international and domestic fire. NATO and European leaders probably thought they'd seen off the danger, but this week Trump's Greenland envoy was backing demand of total unfettered access to the island. So who knows what his boss might say next week. See, Greenland is not off the table. The idea like, oh, well, now he is not going to pursue this idea anymore to overtake Greenland, that's foolish. That's foolish to think that way. And I found this article by The Guardian quite interesting because they make exactly the point which we are making in our Standing Watch program, Trump's Greenland deal, defeat or distraction, question mark. Now, another one I like to briefly talk about, that was another interesting article. There are more coming out next week about some people in Germany who become more popular. One seems to be a rising star of the AfD, and somebody perhaps to watch to see whether he might become a German chancellor in the future. Who knows? It's not going to be Alice Weidel, who is running the AfD at this point, or even the co-leader. You know, this is somebody, again, these people, it was clear from the outset they are not going to have great impact ultimately. But so this is all going to be discussed next time. But I like to really read something, because I haven't talked an awful lot about ICE and the immigration debacle over there, not just in Minneapolis, but also around the United States. The fact that ICE and Donald Trump have reached the absolute low in approval ratings, even when it comes to immigration, should tell us something. It's also talking about the fact that those who are, normally would have voted for him and did vote for him last time, the Latino voters, they're running away from him now, which again gives a strong indication that he is not going to win the midterm election. The majority of the Latino voters completely dismiss and reject what he's doing. But I'd like to read from an article by Judge Andrew Napolitano, somebody whom I have quoted in the past quite a bit. He is a guest speaker on Newsmax, also on Fox News, and he writes rather frequently articles. This one was published in the Ron Paul Institute on January 29. And he goes into the killing of this guy, the second one, a 37-year-old federal employee, a nurse. He goes into the details from everything we know, the fact that the official version by the White House absolutely is false. I mean, that one can be said clearly. That is not how it happened when you look at the videos, which are available all over the place. But he goes further than that, and he says this: the White House has defended the ICE killings of 2 innocent Americans in the maelstrom of Minneapolis by using phrases like terrorist, agitator, assassin, and self-defense. In the process of politically smearing 2 dead victims, it has tried to divert attention away from the ICE Gestapo-like tactics in the streets. More dangerous, he says, than American Gestapo is American psycho. An attitude of government devoid of moral principles. One that, as authoritarians throughout the history have done, targets a helpless, hopeless, politically weak minority and justifies murdering those who protest the violence employed in the targeting. The same psiotic mentality that argued last year it can execute people on the high seas without trial has brought that might makes right nihilism into our streets. He says a lot more, but I feel that's enough because it goes completely and totally hand in hand with what God says about the United States of America today. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 10, verse 6, he calls the USA an ungodly nation. An ungodly nation. And a similar wording is used in the book of Amos and also in the book of Hosea. The problem is, we're not just talking about what ICE is doing. We're talking about how many Americans feel. They're looking at boats which are being obliterated, and they say, oh, well, this is justified because, these are bad guys, these are smugglers. The coldness, the absolute lack of empathy, let alone the lack of justice, is just mind-boggling. And again, I've been saying this time and again, we in the church must be extremely careful that we don't fall into that kind of wrong thinking, because it can easily happen. You can look at these things, you get so familiar with it. I mean, you have all these video games, you have all these movies, all these violent movies, and of course, you're being shown these kind of terrible atrocities just on a daily basis anyway. Now you see it in reality, and you don't make the distinction anymore. Well, this is just what I have been seeing all along. Here, people are going to be killed, murdered. And we don't even know whether they're guilty or not of anything. A lawsuit is being filed right now against the Trump administration by the relatives of somebody who they say was a fisherman who was killed in one of those boats. This is a danger, and God is extremely upset about this. And of course, I've given a sermon on the book of Amos. And I have just given a sermon in Germany on the book of Hosea. And that is going to be also being given here next time I speak. And if you thought that the sermon on the book of Amos was strong, hold your breath, because that sermon on the book of Hosea is going to be even much stronger. Because quoting from that book, there can be no doubt how God looks at our nations. He's not liking it at all. And we had better not beginning to think, oh, everything is great, have a great president, great administration, great government, everything is going to be fine. We would make a terrible mistake if you would think that way. Going back to the update, we have a Q&A. Could you explain what is meant by Saul's soul sleep, part 2, written by Mr. Gale? And this one follows up as the Q&A last week, where he is quoting from sources which talk about quote-unquote soul sleep. All it's talking about is really that the soul is not an immortal soul which keeps on living when a person dies. And so he's going into the arguments of these people who are against this concept and answers those arguments from the Bible. So you might want to really read that carefully because it's a nice Bible study, good refresher. And then finally, in the work section, we do have all the sermons and sermonettes and split sermons listed from here and also from Germany. And then we have a member letter, which was published and which already was sent out. It was written by Pastor Eric Rank, and he is writing how to apply the model prayer given by Jesus and how we can improve our prayers by using this pattern when we come to God in prayer. See, in this member letter, then goes into this outline, step by step, and talks about some of the things when we pray, what actually we can do in order to put some flesh on the skeleton, so to speak. Of course, we do have a booklet, Teach Us to Pray. You might want to read that again if you haven't read it for a while, which of course goes into these things in great detail, and will help you undoubtedly with your prayer life. Well, that's all I have. And, well, I wish I could give you better news when it comes to the world, but there isn't much there to say. But as I said in the editorial, we must live in a joyful way. One of the big characteristics of a Christian is to be joyful. Rejoice. There's a lot to rejoice if you really look at things. I mean, what greater joy can there be to understand that God has called us out of this world and that He has given us knowledge and understanding, which this world doesn't have. Frankly, this world has no hope. The world looks at what's happening right now, and they are looking into the possibility of World War III, which is a real possibility, and they despair. But we mustn't have that kind of an attitude, because we should know that God is there to help us. And He is there to rescue us, to protect us, if we do our part. And as I said, in the meantime, keep on living a joyful life. What does Solomon say in the book of Ecclesiastes? Be joyful, young man, young woman, in the day of your youth. Don't be foolish, though. Don't do the things you shouldn't be doing, but be joyful. Don't be depressed. Don't go around saying, oh, well, what is it good for? God has called you for a reason. He wants you to make it. He will help you. Never forget it.